Let's get this straight. This video will not be your typical boss guide, and it is not for beginners. This is for those who don't want to just survive, but to dominate. Hi boys, I'm Chris Crass, and I've done some pretty insane shit. Today, I'll bring you the best goddamn Elden Ring guide on the planet. You'll know all kinds of things that'll help you not only tackle every single boss in the game, but will even apply in randomizers and challenge runs. To any pro watching this, please roast me if I get anything wrong. But with all that said, if you're truly ready to get good and not just say it, let's get straight into it. Number 1. Learn Strafes. Let's start off this list with a skill I consider to be valuable in almost any scenario. Strafing is defined as the ability to avoid attacks without the use of dodge rolling. And it actually has a significant advantage over the regular somersault, being the ability to take the boss's attacks and turn it against them. Whenever you successfully execute a strafe, you are briefly entering a boss's blind spot, a position where you are free to do damage, all the while the boss can't do nothing to stop you. You don't even have to wait for the boss to stop attacking before invading their personal space and making them eat raw iron, with the biggest strafes turning a 3-second long combo into a massive punish window, while even the smallest strafes transform light attacks into charged attacks, which can make a huge difference. Also, they just look cool as f***. Very important. Oh, and they can also be used as a makeshift heal window. Now, you might think this is only possible with a select number of bosses, but you'd be wrong. From remembrance bosses all the way to random tree spirits, strafes are literally everywhere. And you can easily start with openings such as the Margit Wind-Up Bonk, Moke's Talons into Trident Swing, and Fire Giant's Mega Bonk. Then, once you get the basics down, you can get up to some really depraved shit. I could make an entire video just talking about strafes, but let's move on. Number 2. Take advantage of stance damage. Poise, stance, or whatever the f you want to call it, is an invisible stat any and all enemies have. The heavier the attack, the more damage you do to the stat, and once the bar reaches 0, it results in an enemy being stance broken. However, take too long in between hits, and it will start regenerating. Play your cards right, and it'll make easy enemies even easier, while making the more annoying enemies sit the f down. And to do so, we all know to keep up the pressure and land heavy attacks. But how about a bit of game knowledge to help you out? Now, I won't get into the specifics, but on the boss side of things, typically, the faster, smaller bosses tend to have low poise values, but are quick to start regenerating, whereas bigger, slower bosses tend to have massive poise values, but take longer to start regenerating. As for the weapon side of things, generally, the heavier the weapon is, the more stance damage per hit, with hammers having a slight edge. But don't worry, my light weapon enjoyers, unless you're using a whip or a dagger, enough charged heavies will stagger a boss. As for spells and Ashes of War, look it up yourself. To learn even more about poise, there's this amazing video by Illusory Wall that can explain it way better than I ever will. But for now, let's talk about what happens when you do get that poise break. Number 3. To riposte or not to riposte. Whenever stance breaking a boss, your first instinct may be to walk up to it and immediately land a riposte. I'm here to tell you that in a lot of cases actually, you could do so much more. For one, the bigger bosses tend to stay on the ground for much longer. This allows you to sneak in a few more attacks and still get the riposte, scoring you upwards of 3 times the value of a single critical. However, in some cases, you don't even want the riposte. Take for example, Fire Giant Phase 2. Rather than riposting the eye and doing less damage than a toothpick, you can instead focus on landing your heaviest blows to the head, dealing way more damage. Or like magma worms, who leave their head exposed for so long, it's practically begging for a lobotomy.
That's quite big.
Another funny example are Crucible Knights, who canonically have the Crucible Scale Talisman, which reduces critical hits. So just heavy attack them instead. And if your weapon is heavy enough, it'll throw them backwards and stun them long enough to get another charged heavy. Pair that with parries, and you've got what I like to call the juggle. Straight up bullied. Oh, and Crystallians. It's just faster. With all that said, there are some bosses that you should immediately riposte. These are your Midras or medium knights that can instantly recover upon getting hit, causing you to lose your stance break. Or PCR, who just gets up really fast. Also, I thought I should mention this, but if given the chance, always riposte from the front, as riposting from the back will deal significantly less damage. Number 4. Punish scripted moves. To be brief, a scripted move is an action the boss will almost always do whenever certain conditions are met, commonly after reaching a certain HP threshold. Examples include Margit's hammer at 50% HP, Radagon's dive bomb at the start of phase 2, and Radagon's triple rings at 30%. By memorizing these scripted moves, we can use these to our advantage by planning around it. A great example of this would be Elden Beast, where he'd always start off the fight by doing this long-ass standing fire breath. Knowing this, we can always start off the fight by immediately running to the back of the beast and wailing on him, all the while having zero risk and all the reward just by knowing this. Like, people take this for granted, but simply knowing that a big attack is coming not only allows you to prepare a way to avoid it, but also gives you time to think up a way to take advantage of it, which can be even stronger if you pair with stance breaks. For example, when Rolana gets to 50% HP, I like to go all in and land as many charged heavies as possible, as I know for a fact she'll leave herself completely open during her phase transition. Not to mention, it pays off really well, as it cuts down a huge chunk of time I spend in phase 2, which is the most dangerous part of the fight. With all that said, let's end off the segment with a list of miscellaneous scripted moves that might be helpful to know. Fully grown Falling Star Beast's Gravity Grab, Estelle's Meteorite of Estelle, Renala's Comet Azure, alright, fully charged heavy right here, Rykard's Skull Rain, and this entire Radon part. Number 5. Learn to fight without lock-on. Locking on, which is signified by this little dot, is a primary tool given to you by the game that locks your camera to a single enemy and conveniently centers them on screen. It's very useful, and I still use it for the majority of the fights. However, for now, I want to talk about the many occasions where unlocking can prove to be valuable. For one, unlocking gives you complete control over the camera, allowing you to dynamically move it mid-combat, which can be a game changer whenever facing off against mega-sized bosses. Rather than being stuck staring at a chunk of meat, you can instead adjust the camera as you go to better navigate the fight. Another cool thing it can do is allow you to attack independently of the camera, and in a way, aim your attacks, as the direction you swing the attacks is now tied to your movement controls, which can be helpful when trying to land attacks on a boss's weak spot, especially when the weak spot in question can't be locked onto. It's also great as utility. Manually aim consumables, scan surroundings mid-boss fight, and keeping track of enemies in duo fights. Furthermore, it can really help out with avoiding attacks, allowing you to dodge attacks much more easily or avoid things from angles you normally wouldn't be able to. From simply positioning yourself behind a large boss to dodging a waterfowl point blank, the possibilities are endless. Experiment and see what works out for you. You might even find certain scenarios that you yourself find better without lock-on. With all that said, let's now talk about one of the 2 most common boss weaknesses. Number 6. Exploit weak spot damage. A weak spot is basically a specific part of a boss's body that takes more damage than most. Most of the time it's the head, but sometimes it's an open cavity, a f***ed up limb, or Mateer's hole. There's just so many goobers in this game that share this weakness that understanding how and where to punish these weak spots can be a goddamn game changer. Take for example, dragons and Falling Star Beast. Not only do they take extra damage to the head, but also take extra stance damage, rewarding you for going for the head and making these fights so much faster if you know what you're doing. In some cases, you could be fighting a fairly tanky boss. However, stance break that baby to make their head fall down and just wail on that thing. All of a sudden, that HP bar doesn't seem that big now. With some bosses you do this too, taking absurd levels of extra damage. Also, did I mention they also take extra status buildup? As for the fights that are just one dangling weak spot, learn to position yourself correctly and it'll help you out greatly. With all that said, I think it's super cool to just have an option to choose whether or not to play it safe or punish the weak spot for insane value. It just adds so much depth to the combat system. Pair that with the stance system and man, this is peak. But enough glazing aside, let's talk about the other super common boss weakness. Number 7. Exploit Micro-Staggers. A Micro-Stagger is basically what happens when you slap an enemy in the face and it flinches. That flinch right there is the biggest weakness of any lightweight boss. Why do I say this? Well, here's why. Not only does it interrupt attacks, but it also briefly holds the boss in place. When fighting extremely mobile bosses such as Malenia, Black Knives, or NPCs, making use of this attack cancelling is key. Time your attacks to hit right before an enemy does theirs to continuously counter it. Use the stagger from one attack to land another and maybe even another. Or rush in and attack them while their guard is up, knowing the stun will shield you from harm. An option that doesn't exist while fighting larger bosses. Follow these 3 steps, and trust me, you'll get off way more hits than you normally would by dodging every attack. That said, not every enemy is as nimble as a Black Knife. As for the medium duelist sized bosses, though they might not be as easy to micro-stagger, the 3 techniques mentioned work even better against them, as they can't or don't dodge as often, and thus have a harder time breaking away from the loop. Like, do you see what I'm doing to this Misbegotten? In a lot of cases actually, it's as easy as finding one attack that can flinch the boss and spamming it over and over again, allowing you to completely stun loop some medium bosses before you stance break them and continue the humiliation ritual. Of course, the easiest kind of weapons to do this is the heavy bonks. However, by adjusting certain attacks, some lighter weapons will also be able to initiate the loop of shame. Number 8. Learn jumps. The way it works is that as soon as you click the jump button, your entire lower body will become invulnerable for about 25 frames before you reach the ground, which is way longer than the dodge roll's 13 iframes, making attacks that can be dodged with jumps much more forgiving. Not to mention it covers more distance while sprinting, making it essential for a bunch of strafes. As a dodge option, I find jumps incredibly underrated, as the sheer amount of attacks that can be avoided by using them is kinda crazy. From fairly obvious ones like Godfrey's shockwaves, to more niche ones like jumping part of Malekith's signature move, or random tail attacks. And then you have the really weird ones, like Dancing Lion's Lightning, the actual lightning, Elimer's Grab, Draconic Shield, Devonia's Hammer Thrust, and Puke Knight's Slam. All of this is great for defense, but what about offense? Well, though jumping attacks are one of the most damaging attacks per hit, unless you're micro-staggering the boss, I don't recommend brainlessly spamming it. It doesn't exactly have the best DPS or stamina efficiency, and it leaves you completely open. Instead, think of it more as a specialized tool, rather than a primary means of attack. Use it to get in hits you normally wouldn't be able to while rolling, keep up stance pressure while the boss does an otherwise stalling move, hit weak spots that are out of reach, or simply turning a rolling R1 opening into a jumping R2. Over time, things can really add up. After all, 1.5 is always bigger than 1. In some specific fights, it can actually be a potential unseen counter, ignoring micro-staggers. In fights such as Red Wolf, Black Knives, and Putrescent Knight, which are notoriously hard to land charged R2s on, and thus stance break, they actually have quite a few openings in their basic moveset that can easily be jump punished for massive value. And I'm not talking semi-frequent moves either. They do these often. So often, in fact, that it actually manages to build up decent stance pressure to reliably stance break the boss, something that's much harder to do otherwise. Number 9. Learn parries. The biggest misconception with parries is that they're just too hard to execute and are just not worth the risk, since you could just attack the boss anyway to deal damage instead of complicating things. If this is how you think of them, then you've got it all wrong. You don't parry in every fight it can be used in. You use them to make certain fights go way faster. A great example of this is stall fights. Take Commander Nile for instance. This guy has Ice Storms, Ice Stomps, Lightning Jumps, Ice Rushes, a bunch of things that just massively inflate the length of the fight. Instead of dealing with all that, just parry him once to put an immediate stop to all his antics and get in some solid damage. There's a bunch of stall bosses just like this in the game, and all can be dealt with using parries. But none more impactful than the halberd-wielding Knight's Cav. Parried this guy once, and boom. You just made one of the most stalling enemies in the entire game fall to the floor, completely taking away their biggest strength. Unfortunately though, you can't parry the flail version. Another reason to use them would be for juggling. I've explained this in a previous segment, but I just need to emphasize just how fast this can kill Crucible Knights. Being able to land 2 heavies and sometimes a riposte for the price of 1 parry is kind of insane to me. And it's not like it's limited to just them either. Juggle Death Knights, juggle Divine Warriors, juggle Blood Fiends, juggle f***ing Anze. And by the way, I'm doing all this without any damage boosting gear. Get an actual build going, and this would go crazy. Bosses that require more than 1 parry aren't safe either. Midra, Elimer, and Relana are all bosses that can be attacked once every parry. allowing for extra damage, stance pressure, and status buildup on top of the riposte. Also, I have no idea how to fit this into the script, but some bosses stay on the floor for so long after every riposte, it just makes them even better to parry. Anyways, they can also be useful for utility, such as iframes in duo fights. And remember Midra's signature 5-piece frenzy combo? Yeah, you could just straight up cancel that. And finally, we have bosses I consider to be just better with parries. These are bosses such as PCR, Godska Noble, and Rilana that embody multiple of the points that I've already listed, as they straight up trivialize the fight or just make them go way faster. With all that said, there are multiple fights I wouldn't recommend you parry in. These are bosses with rare or infrequent parries, such as Romina or Mesmer. Bosses you can micro-stagger, such as most NPCs. And finally, bosses that stall because of parries, such as Miscellaneous, who backs off every time, or Radagon, who summons this lingering light pillar. Number 10. Miscellaneous tips and tricks. Alright, this is the part of the video where I drop a bunch of info that isn't enough to make a whole segment on, but still really useful. So yeah. 10.1. Why you should crouch. Ever wonder why pros always do this thing where they crouch before riposte? Well, that's for two reasons. Let me explain. Whenever your attack consumes more stamina than what you have on screen, you actually take a negative stamina hit, making it actually take longer for your stamina to reappear. Crouching effectively cancels this effect, and makes you start regenerating stamina immediately. Realistically, this only saves up to half a second, but that half second can be the difference between landing and missing the riposte. The other reason is that crouching causes a brief pause to the player's movements, allowing you to do things like use a mid-sprint to stick the riposte, instead of accidentally doing a running attack. You won't always need to crouch for every riposte, but it's just a good habit. Also, healing while crouched doesn't slow down stamina recovery, unlike healing standing up. So that's neat. 10.2. Vigor is king. I'ma be real, boys. The simplest way to be fast and efficient in a boss rush is to just not die. Having high enough vigor can be the difference between just being a slight inconvenience or being one shot and having to redo the fight all over again. Whenever I'm doing randomized races, 90% of the time, I just go all in on vigor until I reach 40 before I start caring about anything else. It's not like I plan to get hit or anything. It's just to make sure minor mistakes don't become major setbacks. I see a lot of goobers go for stats like strength or dex early on, and I hate to break it to you, but that plus 0 descaling axe ain't gonna do you any favors. So yeah, unless you're trying to go hitless or speedrunning, never cheap out on vigor. What the fuck? 10.3. Understanding damage types. There's like 8 of these in the game, and having an understanding of which ones a particular boss is strong or weak to can really make a difference. For example, Borealis has insane resistances to both slash and pierce damage. So if I encounter her in a random race with a spear or something, alright, well, I'm switching weapons for that. I try my best to find and wield a standard or preferably a strike weapon, as that's what she's weak to. Sure, spending a few seconds upgrading a new weapon can be annoying, but it's much better than wasting actual minutes trying to beat a boss that takes like no damage. After the fight was over, I then kept the weapon in my pocket, which I brought out again later on to use against Pube Knight, as I knew for a fact undead were resistant to pierce damage. Another situation I actually found myself in was when I fought Classy with a Colossal Sword. Knowing he's way weaker to pierce than he is to standard, I then decided to spam crouch R1s, as this causes the weapon to do pierce instead of standard, and it worked out really well. Had I stuck to my regular R1s, the fight would have taken much longer. And these are just a few small examples. If you're trying to do something like an all bosses run, having a weapon for any occasion can be really useful. If you want my personal opinion on each damage type, here's what I think of each of them in a nutshell, and here's my discarded script. Also, stop using Fextra for your boss info. In the description, I've linked a super useful spreadsheet containing not only damage resistances, but also poise values, status values, and even weak spot damage of literally every enemy in the entire game. 10.4. Status versus scaling. In early game, status affinities, mainly Bleed and Frost, are incredible, as they offer a reliable source of burst damage, taking advantage of enemies' low HP pools and resistances, making fights go way faster. However, later into the game, you might want to spec into more specialized affinities such as Keen, Heavy, or maybe even Occult, as by this point in the game, your damage will start to scale way better, making the burst damage from status effects much less significant, if not at all. As a wise man once told me, good damage is always better than mid damage and status, as not every enemy in the game is affected by status, with some actually being immune to several, or maybe even all of them. Not to mention that AR can be massively boosted by all sorts of things like damage boosting talismans, tiers, or buffs, unlike statuses that cannot be boosted at all. Now, I'm not saying this applies to every single build, especially the defense ones. The main reason I made this segment is specifically because I saw a lot of players unknowingly nerf their damage by speccing into cold or blood really late into the game. Also, it's not like you need status affinities to proc statuses with your weapon. Oh, and by the way, I'll also link this epic weapon calculator website. I like to use it to compare AR across affinities or to reveal the exact scaling value, but it can do so much more. Learn unique boss weaknesses. Unlike the common boss weaknesses I've already mentioned, some bosses have weaknesses entirely unique to themselves or their type. For instance, abductor virgins are not only super weak to lightning damage, but they also uniquely poise break after any 5 hits of the damage type, a quality to my knowledge no other enemy has. Next up, we have Bewitching Branches. These consumables can be used in the Commander Naal fight to charm the 2 Night Spirits that he summons to fight for you instead, with either of them being able to deal some nasty damage. Insane. Crystal Darts can do something similar. Throw 4 of them at any watchdogs, and they'll short circuit and attack everything they see. Very useful for the numerous occasions you find them with a friend. And a lifesaver if you encounter them high scaled in rando. Moving on to Sleep, we all know it can trivialize the Godskin duo. However, they are also really effective on most beast-type enemies. Use it against demi-humans, demi-human queens, beasts, trolls, bears, and even red bears, with the demi-human swordsman being the only outlier. Then we got Mirandas and Fire, Revenants and Heal spells, and of course Night Scabs and Parries. You won't always have this stuff at the ready at all times, but just in case you do, it'll turn 3-minute long fights into 30-second encounters. Number 11. How to practice or practice tools. Now that everything's all said and done, the only thing to do now is to put it to use. Luckily for you though, I have just the thing to help you out on your journey. Here's a bunch of tools that'll help you hone your skills so much faster. Some of which I genuinely wish I knew sooner. First up, we got ER Tool. This nifty thingamajig allows you to do a bunch of different things, but here's some highlights. Enabling targeting options allows you to view all boss stats such as poise or status effects in real time, or frame data is what you're interested in. Lowering the game speed and enabling this option right here can help you better observe hitboxes. However, my personal favorite thing about this tool is definitely repeat last action. Simply enable the option when the boss does your desired move and they'll spam nothing but that move until you turn it off. And trust me man, it helps you learn how to dodge hard moves way faster. In fact, this is exactly what I did to learn the Omega Consort Strafe you saw in the first 3 seconds of the video, being so useful in fact that it was also how a lot of my friends learned how to dodge waterfowl. Moving on, we have the Boss Arena mod. And holy crap, this is a gem. Downloading the sandbox version of this game transports you to a modified version of Roundtable, immediately giving you access to all items, upgrades, and levels straight from the get-go, as well as access to any boss in the entire game, and being able to refight them as much as you like, allowing you to essentially hop into a game and fight any boss with any build you desire. No hassle, no drawbacks, and you can even infinitely respec. This mod is where I got 90% of my footage from, and I cannot recommend it enough. There's also a progression mode you can download, which lets you essentially do boss rushes that can drop randomized items every boss kill, which I find really neat. And of course, we have the classic Elden Ring randomizer. So simple, yet so complex. If I were to praise this mod, we would be here all day. Simply put, fighting a particular boss in a different arena or scaling can really make you learn the boss in ways that you never would have had to otherwise. Not to mention it tests your adaptability and resourcefulness, as you're not going to know what bosses or items you're going to get. I also like to merge it with other mods, such as the previously mentioned progression mod, to add an extra kick. So yeah, once again, all these downloads are free, and I've linked them all in the description. Happy practicing. Alright, this video took a lot more out of me than I thought it would, so if you made it this far, I hope it was helpful. This video was basically my attempt at making an actual advanced level guide for players who actually want to get good and master the game, as almost all of the guides I see on the internet are either beginner level how-tos or explain the most basic level shit. This was the passion project I had lingering in my head for some time now, and I'm glad I finally made it. With all that said, leave a comment if you found anything useful, and make sure to roast me if I got anything wrong. I wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks.